So yeah, thanks Leah for the introduction and all the ideas just now. I do feel somewhat like I'm doubling up some information here and there. From our perspective, we're an organization, humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, that mostly focuses on, say, mapping of geographical infrastructure and features. So in that sense, we're often sticking to more the first category you indicated, the geographical administrative boundaries, let's say, and seeing how those match up to reality, community perception, and official administrative boundaries. And of course, there's several scenarios you can find there on the next slide. When you look at, say, more official administrative boundaries, which is the category we most often work with, as I said, the work we do is mostly in support of the programming of other organizations, in support of urban planning and disaster risk management. So in that sense, we often collaborate quite a bit with local national governments to help them improve urban planning, service delivery of the areas they're governing. Of course, what you can find, the first case is the easy one, and the one probably not very often encountered by all of us in the areas we're working in. Everything aligns perfectly, all is neat and orderly. Basically, you can just use official data and be done with it. Of course, there's alternatives to this. Official data may be available, but differ from community perceptions due to various factors as we just discussed. Social perceptions differ, service catchment areas are significantly different, or there may be physical characteristics which interfere. So there may be major roads or rivers crossing just through the middle of, say, official boundaries of locations. Fourth option is that there is a de facto understanding at the community level of boundaries, also of, say, maybe local government, municipalities, but a lack of properly surveyed data. And lastly, of course, there's also the option that there's little to no data on boundaries available, and you'll need to be working with local communities, governments to define those. Yeah, so this is the first case, roughly where I live. I don't think many of us will be working in this type of urban context, and as such, it's a scenario that I've actually not really encountered in the work we've been doing. Smack in the middle of the Netherlands, everything is nice, neat, ordered. You can get open data on boundaries, on buildings, and whatever infrastructure you need. If you would ever have an operation here, you're all set. That's probably not what you will be encountering. A major city where we have been doing mapping at the community level in support of urban planning is Dar es Salaam, which is a city which is, according to the African Development Bank reports, the fastest growing city in Africa, and growing at around 6% a year, which means about 500,000 people get added to the city on a yearly basis, which means that the situation is also quite dynamic, and community perceptions of boundaries also are a moving target. So you'll often be working with maybe official data, but that doesn't conform to reality anymore due to the growth of the city, in combination with urban planning, which is quite far behind reality. It's a city suffering from numerous issues, and due to that rapid growth, the project we're running there is focused on drainage and flooding issues, and, say, drainage waterways, and try to improve infrastructure to cope with that. A lot of associated problems there: floodplains being built up, waterways constricted, improper solid waste disposal. And what we found there is that there are official boundaries of the city, of the wards, but these don't really align anymore with reality on the ground as it is now. So indeed, here's the same type of approach that Christine was discussing for REACH, where you work with local communities in focus group discussions and see where, say, their perceptions of boundaries align with official government data and where they don't. This is important, obviously, because we've found, for example, cases where the local person in charge of a ward, which is the subdivision at which we're working in Dar es Salaam, had a very different perception of its boundary than the municipality. meaning that there was basically an area where no one was paying any attention to, because everyone thought it was being taken care of by someone else, which means these people don't have a voice, basically, have nowhere to address their issues and their living conditions to work on that. Here you see an exercise, by the way, focusing more on flooding and vulnerability, but in the same type of sessions we're also addressing administrative boundaries. There are official data sources available here. This is on the HDX, Humanitarian Data Exchange, where you'll find official boundaries at the ward level of Tanzania. But as you'll see, this particular one has quite a good shape. It's crossing major roads. There's disjointed pieces. It's incredibly large. If you imagine that the part just to the top right of it is all of downtown Dar es Salaam up until the, say, the inner ring road. But due to expansion of the city, as I mentioned, these type of things mean that there's by now a lot of people living in this area, and there's a very low level of awareness there of boundaries, whose responsibility these people are, and therefore whose responsibility it is to be making sure that services are properly being extended to the people living there. This is a bit of a different situation. This is in northern Uganda, around the refugee situation there. Of course, one of my smaller questions here is indeed how you define urban. There seems to be the USAID definition is anything above 5,000 persons or something like that, I believe. In a sense, the refugee camps in northern Uganda definitely count as urban, but it's a situation you encounter in other countries, and we've encountered in other countries and locations as well, where basically villages that have existed for some time are getting swallowed up by urban expansion, or in this case, expansion of refugee settlements, which means there's a very low level of organization and planning, and basically communities being swallowed up by larger ones, which really wreaks havoc on, say, existing perceptions of boundaries. So going back to the, say, the categories Leah identified, in this case, you're going to end up with a very dynamic situations where both service catchment areas and social perceptions, but also official boundaries are basically being pulled in a lot of different directions and will not correspond anymore to previous realities, which means there's a need to again be collecting more data and surveys and see how administrative boundaries will need to be handled to address current changing situations. Then lastly, we're also encountering situations where basically there's little to no information on the current administrative boundaries, which means that effectively a lot of people are not being accounted for in urban planning, in planning for education, healthcare, water points, those type of things. So what you'll see here is in Liberia, in Zouérou to be exact, city in more the hinterland of Liberia, where on the wall you'll see the latest and greatest urban planning documents that are being used there from before the civil war in Liberia, which basically captures just a tiny area of the city where people actually live, work, etc. And in this case, we've been working quite heavily with different layers of government, with municipality, with National Mapping Agency, LISTGIS, and everything in between, to work to redefine and standardize boundaries, and working with communities to get a sense of where indeed their perceptions of boundaries are, how that aligns to official data, which up to now just existed on paper. On the left you'll see basically the city's idea of what area they need to govern. There's 2 central blocks, and then in Liberia the official city limit is 8 miles, an 8 miles radius from the center of the city, so there's that. But within that there was very little idea on where communities actually exist, in this being quite dense jungle to a very large extent, tropical rainforest, with people living in places where they've basically not been counted and certainly not considered part of their administrative zone previously. You also see that the names given here are the very helpful zone 1 through 8, and within that there's named communities. The communities do have names that align to the names that the people living there actually use for these parts, and the zones do not. But that's also something you'll need to account for. So when figuring out the naming for these zones, you'll need to, or for the communities, you'll need to ask, what is the official name for this part of your neighborhood? How do you call it? How do your neighbors call it? Do these things intersect, or do we need to make sure that we capture all these names? Wherever we can, as I said, we do try to collaborate with local authorities as much as we can. This also assures that, say, in future operations and interventions, other organizations can also make use of the same data. We're an organization that publishes all the data we collect onto OpenStreetMap, which is an open data platform, meaning everyone will have access to and can use that data going forward. This goes for both, say, local governments, but also other aid organizations. So hopefully this makes sure that in the future they will be better able to deliver services to everyone living in this area. Lastly, of course, we are collecting the data in, say, primarily digital format, but it is important also to definitely not neglect paper maps and make sure to, just due to the low possibility sometimes of having access to digital formats and the capability of people to be using proper GIS systems, do make sure to also be distributing paper maps and those type of things. That's it for my part. Next slide is thanks and goodbye. So yeah, looking forward to your questions on this. Thank you.